you've ever been in a conversation with a native speaker and thought, wait, what did they just say? Was that even German? A lot of learners tell me they feel pretty confident with textbook German, but then they talk to actual Germans. And suddenly it feels like a completely different language. You learn one version of the language in the classroom or on your language apps, but native speakers use another. So in today's video, I want to help you make sense of how native speakers actually speak the real life everyday German you don't learn in class. We're going to take a look at the most common patterns native speakers use that can be confusing at first. And I'll give you examples so you can start recognizing them and feel way more confident in conversations. If you're new here, hallo und herzlich willkommen. I'm Salome, a native German teacher and the founder of the German Fluency Academy, where I help expats go from zero knowledge to confident and conversational in German. So if you're just starting out or want to build a solid foundation, my free beginner workshop is the perfect place to begin. It will give you a clear, simple roadmap to learn the kind of German you'll actually use from day one. You can register for free using the link in the description box below. Alright, let's get into the real-life German that no textbook ever prepared you for. Native speakers love to shorten things. So one thing that really throws a lot of learners off is how fast Germans speak and how they love to shorten words or mash them together, especially in everyday conversations. It's actually totally normal, but if you've only ever heard the clean, full version of German in a classroom or on an app, it can sound like a completely different language. For example, in like 99% of everyday conversations, Germans drop the E at the end of verbs when they're speaking in the Ich form. So when saying I. So for example, instead of saying ich lerne, people will just say ich lerne. Ich lerne Deutsch. And it happens with tons of verbs. Here are a few more examples. Instead of saying ich mache, we'd say ich mach. Ich mach das später. Or ich kaufe. Ich kauf. Ich kauf noch ein Brot. Ich spiele. Ich spiel. Ich spiel gern Fußball. Ich arbeite. Ich arbeite. Ich arbeite morgen von zu Hause. Another pattern is with the verb haben, which means to have, that often gets shortened to haben. So instead of saying wir haben, we'd say wir haben. Also, was haben wir heute vor? Someone might say, was haben wir heute vor? And heute usually gets cut down to just heut. So, was machst du heute becomes, was machst du heut? Once you start noticing these patterns, it really gets easier. You realize, oh, they're not skipping words, they're just saying them either faster and shorter or putting them together. It's kind of like in English we say gonna instead of going to, or wanna instead of want to. So words get smushed together. In spoken German, a lot of words get merged, especially things like modal verbs and pronouns. Here are a few examples. Kannst du becomes kannste. Kannst du mir helfen? Willst du becomes willste. Willste mitkommen? And hast du becomes haste. Haste Zeit? Here's another thing that can really throw you off when listening to native speakers. The word es, so it, almost always gets shortened in casual conversations, usually to just an s. So instead of saying the full word, German will blend it right into the verb. Here are some examples. Wie geht es dir? Wie geht's dir? Heute ist es warm. Heute ist's warm. Gibt es das noch? Gibt's das noch? And nicht and nichts also get shortened. Yep, those two. Nicht becomes just nicht, so you don't pronounce the T. You would just say, for example, ich weiß nicht instead of ich weiß nicht. And nichts oftentimes just becomes nix. For example, ich habe nichts gemacht becomes ich habe nichts gemacht. You will also hear a lot of filler words. Another thing that confuses a lot of German learners are those little words native speakers throw into sentences that just seems kind of like unnecessary. I'm talking about words like halt, eben, doch, mal. They add a tone, a nuance, or an emotion, and they're everywhere in spoken German. These are so-called modal particles, and they're one of the reasons native German sounds so different from textbook German. Here are a few examples you'll definitely hear. Halt, which kind of means like just, or that's just how it is. You can use that to state something as obvious or self-evident. Like for example, das ist halt so. Or ich habe halt keine Zeit. Another one is eben. That can mean exactly or just, depending on the context. You basically emphasize agreement or explain reasoning. Zum Beispiel, ich hab's dir eben gesagt. I literally just told you. Or dann ist das ebenso. Then that's just how it is. Another one is doch. This one's tricky but also super common. It's either used to contradict negatives or to add emphasis. For example, du hast das nicht gemacht. Doch, hab ich. But yes, I did. I'm contradicting your statement, right? Or another example, das ist doch klar. Well, that's like obvious, that's clear. Mal. Mal often softens a sentence, especially commands or questions. It's a little hard to translate, but it makes things sound more friendly or casual. Like for example, komm mal her. Come here for a second. Or schau mal. Look. These words are really subtle and yeah, they don't have an exact English equivalent, but they're super important for sounding natural and understanding native speakers better. If you want to dive deeper into these and really learn how and when to use them, I've made a whole video just about modal particles, what they are, what they mean, and how they change the tone of a sentence. I'll link that below. Another pattern that you might have already noticed is that the word du often blends into the verb or disappears completely, and the verb itself gets an extra little e attached to the end. So for example, instead of saying bist du müde, you'll hear bist du müde. Or hast du Hunger? Hast du Hunger? Gehst du mit? Gehst du mit? Machst du das? Machst du das? So these are general patterns you'll hear in standard spoken German, also Hochdeutsch, across pretty much all regions. They're not tied to a specific city or state. That said, don't confuse this with actual dialects like Bavarian, Swabian, or Saxon. Dialects are a whole different game and can sound very, very different from standard German. I've actually made a few videos on Swabian versus High Standard German and also High Standard German versus Hessian that I'll link below. If you are planning to relocate to these areas or travel, then it's definitely worth checking that out. Alright, so if German sometimes sounds like a totally different language when native speakers speak, you're not imagining it. Between shortened verbs, dropped words, blended sounds, and all those little filler words, it can feel overwhelming at first. But once you start to recognize these patterns, spoken German gets so much easier to follow and way more fun to engage with. If you want to sound more natural and understand native speakers better, keep practicing your listening with real conversations, not just textbook audio. Also, if you're still at the beginning of your German journey and want a clear, simple roadmap, my free beginner workshop is the perfect place to start. You'll learn the real world German that actually helps you connect with people right from day one. The link is below to register for free and I would love to see you there. Das ist alles für heute. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!